The freezer hummed its dying song at 3:22 in the morning. Clara Vasquez stood between the hanging sides of beef, her breath turning to fog in the cold, her orthopedic shoes leaving wet prints on concrete that would vanish within seconds. Her fingers shook as she counted the bills spread across her palm. $43. Rumpled, worn, the kind of money that felt like nothing because it was nothing. She needed $125,000 in 21 days. 21 days to save her niece Lily from the system, from foster care, from disappearing into the machinery of government paperwork that did not care about love or blood, or the 8-year-old girl who slept on a cot in Clara's apartment and asked every morning if today was the day everything would be okay again. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed beyond the freezer door. 3 a.m. was the deepest part of the night, the hour when the city held its breath and even the roaches seemed reluctant to move. Clara had worked double shifts for 6 years. Double shifts meant her feet swelled until she could not remove her shoes without crying. Double shifts meant she ate the leftover food from plates customers sent back, cold chicken, fried steak and congealed gravy, because throwing it away felt like throwing away her daughter's future. $43 in tips on a Tuesday night meant rent would be 17 days late. 17 days meant an eviction notice. An eviction notice meant Lily would go into foster care and Clara would lose her forever because the courts did not care that Clara loved her more than her own heartbeat. The courts only cared that Clara's stepfather James Whitfield had stolen the inheritance their mother left them, forged documents that made Clara legally responsible for a debt she did not create, and disappeared with $200,000 that was supposed to protect Lily for a lifetime. She folded the bills again. Counted them again. Still 43. Math did not change when you were desperate. The walk-in freezer had a single bulb that cast everything in sickly yellow light. Through the small window in the door, Clara could see the diner's kitchen. Empty. The owner, Danny, had gone home an hour ago. The other server, Michelle, had clocked out at 2. That meant the diner was Clara's domain, and she did not have to pretend to be grateful or strong or like this was not slowly killing her. The scars on her back, hidden beneath her uniform, seemed to ache in the cold. 8 years she had carried those marks. 8 years since she was 19 years old and living in her stepfather's house and learning what happened to girls who told anyone the truth. 8 years of silence. 8 years of her mother pretending not to see the bruises. 8 years until her mother died and left everything to Clara, and James Whitfield found the will hidden in a desk drawer and decided that his stepdaughter's inheritance was his to steal. Now she was 37 years old and had nothing but a waitress uniform, an apartment with water stains on the ceiling, a legal debt that was not hers, and a child she would die before losing. The rain outside sounded like someone throwing sand against glass. Miami rain in November was warm and vicious. It came sideways because the wind turned everything sideways. Clara had walked to work in that rain 3 hours ago, her shoes already broken and falling apart, her uniform already stained with coffee and yesterday's tears. She would walk home in an hour. Walk meant 23 minutes at her current pace, down the empty streets where the neon signs reflected in puddles and made the whole world look like it was drowning in red and green and blue light. 21 days. She pushed open the freezer door and stepped out into the kitchen's relative warmth. Her fingers burned as feeling returned to them. She placed the $43 in her apron pocket, on top of the child's drawing she kept there. Lily had drawn a family last week in school. 3 figures holding hands. Yellow sun in the corner. The words "my family" written in her careful 8-year-old letters, the RS backward because she was still learning, because she was still a child who believed things could be good. Clara pulled out the drawing sometimes during her shifts, when the despair felt like it might swallow her whole, and she looked at those backward RS and those 3 figures and reminded herself that Lily believed in her. Lily believed that Clara could fix this. Lily believed in a future where they were not terrified all the time. 3:28 a.m. The rain intensified. Through the diner's front windows, Clara saw something shift in the darkness across the street. A figure moved near the abandoned storefront there, the one that had been empty since the recession. Then another figure. Then 2 more, their shoulders broad, their movement synchronized like they had done this before, like violence was their native language. An old man stumbled backward into view. His hands were up, his face catching the neon light. Terrified. Small. Defenseless. The first figure grabbed his collar and slammed him against the metal door of the abandoned shop. The sound echoed across the empty street. Clara's breath caught. She should call the police. She should stay inside. She should count her $43 and think about Lily and not get involved in something that would get her killed or arrested or both. She should do the smart thing. The safe thing. The thing that people who had something to lose were supposed to do. But Clara had learned long ago that sometimes there was no such thing as safe. Sometimes the only choice was between dying slowly or dying fast, and she had been dying slowly for 8 years and she was tired of it. She moved without deciding to move. Her feet carried her toward the back door. Her hand pushed it open. The rain hit her like something solid, like the sky had decided to throw itself at the earth. The wind tried to push her backward. She leaned into it and crossed the empty street in 6 seconds, her orthopedic shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the neon, her uniform soaked to her skin, her voice steady when she stepped between the old man and the figure holding him. Let him go. The figure turned. Male. Tall. Broad-shouldered. One of 2 men, maybe 3, their faces shadowed but their intention clear as written language. They did not expect resistance. Especially not from a woman in a stained diner uniform, 37 years old, weighing 135 pounds, worth approximately $43 to the entire city of Miami. Walk away, the man said. His voice sounded like concrete. Clara did not walk away. What she did not know was that someone was watching from the shadows of the building across the street. Someone whose heart had been broken 12 years ago in a way that could not be repaired, whose grief had calcified into ice and power, and men who did exactly what he told them to do without question. Someone named Luca Castellano, a man who had last cried on the day they told him his daughter would not survive the night, and who had not let himself feel anything approaching gentleness since that moment. A man who had built an empire on the foundation of his own destroyed hope. A man who fell to his knees the instant he saw her courage. Before we continue, I need you to do something for me. If this story is hitting you, drop a like right now. Share this video with someone you love, someone who needs to hear that standing up matters even when you have nothing. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next, because I promise you, what happens in the next few minutes will change everything. Okay. Now let us go back to the beginning. Let us understand how Clara Vasquez, a woman with $43 to her name, ended up standing in a hurricane of rain between 2 dangerous men and the old stranger they were hurting. Let us go back to the start of this story, to the morning that changed everything. 342 hours earlier. That was how long Clara Vasquez had been awake, counting the same $43 in rumpled bills at the walk-in freezer of Sal's diner at 3:22 in the morning, her orthopedic shoes leaving wet prints on concrete that would be gone by sunrise, just like everything else she touched seemed to disappear. The freezer hummed around her, a sound like the world ending in slow motion. Cold bit through her uniform, the thin polyester stained with coffee and grease and the residue of other people's hunger. She had changed uniforms twice that night. Her shift started at 6 in the evening. It was now past 3 in the morning. 9 hours of carrying plates that weighed more than her own hope, 9 hours of smiling at men who did not see her, 9 hours of standing in shoes that had cost $12 3 years ago and had not stopped hurting since the first day she put them on. The bill in her left hand was creased so many times it felt like cloth. She bent it gently. $1. The others were twisted, worn thin at the edges where fingers had counted them 1,000 times before. $43. That was what stood between her and absolute nothing. 21 days. That was how much time remained before the hearing. Before the judge would decide that Lily had no place to stay except in a foster home, in the system, in the hands of strangers who did not know that she had a birthmark shaped like a star on her left shoulder blade, that she had nightmares on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that the only thing that made her stop crying was when Clara braided her hair and told her stories about the ocean they had never seen together. The letter sat in Clara's locker, folded so many times it barely held together. The Department of Child Services. The word foster was printed in bold. The number at the bottom was $125,000. That was what James Whitfield owed her. That was what he had taken when he stole the inheritance from their mother's will, when he forged the documents that made Clara legally responsible for a debt she never created, never agreed to, never in her wildest nightmares imagined could follow her like this. James Whitfield was her stepfather. Or had been, before he disappeared into his own empire of forgery and lies, before he left Clara holding nothing but the wreckage he had made of her name. $43.21. The math did not work. The math had never worked. Clara had worked 3 jobs before the diner fired her for taking time off when Lily got sick. She had cleaned houses. She had done laundry for people who did not know her name. She had sold things she should not have sold, and when those things were gone, she had started selling parts of herself in ways that left marks that no shower could wash clean. The scars on her back had never fully faded. They ran in every direction like a map of somewhere she had never wanted to go, a geography of pain that started when she was 17 and James Whitfield decided that the house he shared with her mother was his kingdom and she was something that existed to test his authority. Nobody knew about the scars. Not at the diner. Not at the houses where she cleaned. Not Lily, who saw Clara change into pajamas every night and had learned not to ask questions, learned that some things were safer left unspoken. Clara folded the bills into a small rectangle and slipped them back into the envelope she kept hidden behind the container of ground beef in the freezer, under a layer of frost that made the paper waterproof. Insurance. Hidden money. The survival strategy of someone who understood that stability was an illusion that other people were allowed to believe in. She checked the clock on the wall. 3:38 in the morning. In 2 hours and 22 minutes, she would go home. In 3 hours, Lily would wake up and ask for cereal that Clara could not afford to buy every week. In 3 hours and 40 minutes, Clara would need to find a way to smile like everything was fine, like they were not standing at the edge of the cliff that James Whitfield had pushed them toward. The walk from the diner to her apartment was 14 blocks. She knew because she had counted them 1,743 times, once for every shift she had worked in the last 3 years. The roads were empty at 5:13 in the morning, just her and the streetlights and the sound of her orthopedic shoes against pavement, each step a small protest against a world that had decided she was worth exactly $43. The rain started somewhere around block 9. Not the kind of rain that fell straight down. The kind that came sideways, that found its way into the collar of her coat even though the coat was zipped all the way up, that made the streets shine like obsidian under the neon signs that stayed lit all night because the people who owned them did not believe in darkness. Clara did not run. Running wasted energy. Everything she did was measured now, calculated, a strict accounting of calories and effort and the number of hours until she could sleep, knowing that sleep was never really rest anymore, only the space between problems. Block 12. The rain was heavier now. The umbrella she carried was missing a panel and had been patched with duct tape twice. It barely functioned, but it was something, and something was better than nothing when you had spent 17 years learning the difference. That was when she heard the sound. Not rain. Not her footsteps. Something else. A voice. Rough. Dangerous. The kind of voice that belonged to men who had never had to ask twice for anything. "Give me your wallet, old man." Clara stopped walking. The rain continued its sideways assault. She turned toward the sound, her orthopedic shoes carrying her against every instinct that screamed at her to keep moving, to keep her head down, to be invisible like she had learned to be invisible, and that was when she saw him. The old man was maybe 70. Gray hair that hung past his collar. Clothes that had been nice once, a long time ago. He was backed against the brick wall of an abandoned storefront, his hands up in that gesture that meant surrender, that meant please, that meant someone had taught him a long time ago that his life depended on compliance. There were 2 men in front of him. Young. Hungry. The kind of hunger that came from rage instead of an empty stomach. One of them had a knife. It was small, maybe 4 inches, but it caught the light of the neon sign above the storefront and made itself important. Clara did not think. Thinking was a luxury for people with options. She walked straight toward them, her voice steady despite the scars that lived under her uniform, despite the weight of invisibility that she had been carrying like a stone in her chest for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it pressing down on her lungs. "Walk away," she said. The men looked at her like she was a hallucination. Like she was something the rain had invented. "Walk away right now, or I will make you regret every decision you have made up until this moment." Her voice did not sound like her voice. It sounded like someone who had survived, someone who had learned that fear and courage lived in the same body and that it was possible to choose which one to feed. And what she did not know, standing there in the rain with her broken umbrella and her stained uniform and her $43 hidden in a freezer 8 blocks away, was that someone was watching from the shadows of the building across the street. Someone tall. Someone whose shoulders carried the weight of an empire. Someone named Luca Castellano, whose grief had turned to ice, whose heart had stopped beating in the normal rhythm of human hearts 12 years ago when a doctor told him his newborn daughter would not survive the night. A man who had not let himself feel anything approaching gentleness since the moment he held her small, perfect body for the only and last time. A man who fell to his knees the instant he saw her courage. Luca Castellano stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse on the 42nd story of a building he owned, watching the rain tear through Miami like something alive and angry. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man of 49 years old, 6 foot 2 inches tall, with shoulders that carried the weight of an empire built on fear and sealed in blood. Dark hair silvered at the temples. Eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, a reminder of a rival he had crushed 15 years ago. He wore a cashmere coat worth more than a year of most people's rent, and beneath it, a tailored suit of black silk that cost more than a car. On his left wrist, a gold watch that kept perfect time, marking every second of his life with mechanical precision. The penthouse was silent except for the sound of rain hammering against the windows like fists demanding entry. Luca did not hear it anymore. He had stopped hearing most things the night his daughter died 12 years ago. The night the doctor placed her small body in his arms and told him she would not survive until morning. The night he held perfection that was already leaving him. He had walked into the hospital nursery exactly once after that moment. Once. He looked at the empty bassinet with her name on it, Lily, and he never went back. Instead, he had locked that door in his heart and thrown away the key. Grief had a way of transforming men. It could crush them into dust, or it could turn them into something harder than stone, something incapable of feeling anything but rage. Luca had chosen the second path. Rage was useful. Rage was clean. Rage could be weaponized. He had built his empire on the principle that emotion was a liability. That sentiment was a luxury for people who had not lost everything. His lieutenants, Marco and Franco, had watched him operate for 15 years without ever showing mercy, without ever hesitating, without ever looking back. They had learned his code: loyalty is absolute, betrayal is death, and the weak do not survive in this world. They had never seen him sit beside anyone with gentleness. They had never heard him speak with anything other than cold instruction or cutting dismissal. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, Clara Vasquez was standing in front of the bathroom mirror in her small apartment, examining the bruises that were still visible on her collarbone despite the 3 weeks that had passed. She had been wearing high necklines, turtlenecks even in the Miami heat, anything to keep the marks hidden. The scars on her back were older, years older, but they still ached when the weather changed, when the wind picked up, when she remembered exactly how they had gotten there. Her stepfather, James Whitfield, had stopped hitting her 2 months ago. He had moved on to screaming instead. The screaming was somehow worse because it was colder, more calculated. He screamed about how she had cost him everything. About the inheritance that should have been his. About the documents she should have signed that would have made it legal. He screamed about how she was ungrateful, defective, useless, the same words he had been using since she was 8 years old and her mother had married him. Clara had survived by becoming invisible. By working double shifts at the diner on 5th Street. By taking every tip she earned and hiding it in a freezer in the walk-in room, where James could not find it. By protecting her 8-year-old niece Lily from the worst of his rage, even though it meant absorbing more of it herself. She pulled down her collar and looked at the fading yellow-green marks on her skin. In 21 days, she needed to have $125,000. The court had given her that timeline. Foster care was waiting if she did not produce the money. Foster care meant James would keep Lily. He had made that very clear. The rain began to fall harder outside her apartment window. At exactly 8:17 in the evening, Marco sat in the back of a black SUV parked across the street from a high-rise office building in downtown Miami. Franco was beside him, scanning the street with the practiced eye of someone whose job was to anticipate violence before it arrived. They were waiting for their boss to finish his business meeting with Victoria Ashford, a woman who had once been Luca's partner in both crime and empire. Victoria was 53 years old, with blonde hair cut in a style that cost more than most people's monthly salary. She wore designer clothing and designer cruelty with equal confidence. She had built her portion of the network by destroying people systematically, not through direct violence, but through social annihilation. She knew how to dig into a person's life and unearth every secret, every vulnerability, every shameful moment, and then she knew exactly how to weaponize that information in ways that left her victim completely exposed. Beside her in the conference room on the 31st floor, Victoria was explaining her latest project to Luca. James Whitfield is becoming a problem, she said, lighting a cigarette even though it was illegal to smoke indoors. He is stealing from his stepdaughter's inheritance. The paperwork is almost done. All we need is for her to sign the final documents, and the money transfers to him. Victoria smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. The girl is nothing. A waitress who works night shifts and counts pennies. No family, no connections, no one who will miss her if she simply disappears into the system. Her niece goes into foster care. James gets the money. We take our cut. Everyone wins except the invisible girl. Luca was not listening anymore. His phone had buzzed. A text from Marco, unusual activity 6 blocks south. Men with weapons in an abandoned building. Possible robbery in progress. He stood. We are done here, he said. His voice sounded like gravel settling. The rain was falling so hard now that visibility was less than 50 feet. Luca moved through the Miami streets in the back of a black SUV with Marco driving and Franco in the passenger seat. The streets were empty except for the sound of water and the occasional flash of neon reflected in puddles. When they arrived at the abandoned storefront on 8th and Holbrook, Luca stepped out of the vehicle and moved toward the alley without a word. Marco and Franco exchanged a look. Their boss never involved himself in street-level crime. That was what they were for. That was the entire structure of the hierarchy. But Luca was already moving, his cashmere coat getting soaked through, his expression focused on something they could not see. What they could not see was Clara Vasquez standing between an old man and 3 men with weapons. What they could not see was her voice, steady and clear despite the terror moving through her body like electricity. Walk away. Right now. Or I will make you regret every decision you have made up until this moment. Luca Castellano stopped moving. Something in his chest that had been frozen for 12 years shifted like ice beginning to crack. He watched her stand there in her stained diner uniform, her orthopedic shoes, her broken umbrella lying on the wet ground beside her. He watched her face, young but worn, marked by something he recognized because he carried it too. Survival. She had the face of someone who had learned that she was not allowed to break, no matter what happened to her body. One of the men raised his knife. Clara did not flinch. That was when Luca moved. Not with rage. With something quieter and more dangerous. The men scattered like they had been caught in an explosion. Marco and Franco found themselves running forward without understanding why they were running, only knowing that their boss was moving and therefore they moved. Within 30 seconds, the alley was empty except for Clara, the old man, Luca, Marco, and Franco. The rain fell between them like a curtain. Are you hurt? Luca asked her, and his voice sounded different than it had in 12 years. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere human. Clara looked at this man in the expensive coat and saw something in his eyes that terrified her more than the knife had. She saw recognition. She saw someone who understood what it meant to have been broken and to have survived anyway. "No," she said. "I am not hurt." "What is your name?" "Clara. Clara Vasquez." The old man spoke then, his voice shaking. "She saved my life. She stood between me and them, and she did not move. She did not even blink." Luca looked at Clara, and something shifted in his face. "Come with me," he said. "It is not safe for you to be out here." "I do not even know you," Clara said, but her voice was uncertain. "No," Luca said. "But I know someone like you. I knew her a long time ago." He did not say the name. He never said the name anymore. "Please, come with me." The rain continued to fall as Clara made a choice that would change everything. She followed him to the black SUV. Marco and Franco watched their boss help her into the vehicle with a gentleness they had never witnessed in 15 years of working for him. They exchanged a look that contained no words, only the recognition that something fundamental had shifted in the universe. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, heading toward the penthouse, Clara had no way of knowing that the man beside her had lost a daughter, that he had not spoken her name in 12 years, that he had built an empire to keep himself from feeling anything, and that in one moment of her courage, all of that had changed. She also did not know that her stepfather, James Whitfield, had spent the last 2 hours in a different part of the city, meeting with Victoria Ashford to finalize the paperwork that would steal the last thing Clara had, her niece. The rain fell harder. The night was far from over. The penthouse was silent except for the sound of Clara's breathing, shallow and fast, as if the air itself had become too thin to hold oxygen. Luca sat across from her in a room where the city lights bled through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the darkness into something almost beautiful. He did not speak. He simply watched her, the way a man might study something he did not understand but desperately needed to. "Why did you bring me here?" Clara asked. Her voice came out fractured, each word requiring effort she did not have. "Because it is not safe for you anywhere else tonight," Luca said. His fingers moved across the desk in front of him, a deliberate motion, controlled. "Tell me about the debt." Clara's hands began to shake. She clasped them together, but the trembling moved up her arms, into her chest, everywhere. The words came out in fragments. 21 days. $125,000. A stepfather who had stolen everything. A niece who would vanish into the foster care system like so many children do, swallowed by a machine that neither loved nor cared. "I have $43, she whispered. $43 and no way to make it work. I have been working double shifts for 8 months. I have not slept more than 4 hours in a single night. I have eaten 1 meal a day. I have sold every single thing that had any value, and it is still not enough. It will never be enough." Luca rose from the chair. He moved toward the window, his silhouette framed against the neon glow of Miami below. His suit was tailored to perfection, the fabric worth more than Clara's monthly rent. His watch caught the light, a slim piece of gold on his wrist that probably cost more than she would earn in 2 years. "Your stepfather," Luca said. "James Whitfield." Clara's entire body went rigid. "How do you know his name?" "I know everything that happens in this city," Luca said. His voice carried no malice, only fact. "I know that he took inheritance documents that belong to you. I know that he forged your signature. I know that he made you legally responsible for a debt you did not create. I know that he has told your niece that you abandoned her." Each sentence fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of confirmation through everything Clara had tried not to think about. Tears began to slip down her face, but she made no sound. Her body had learned long ago that crying and surviving could not happen at the same time. "There is something else you do not know," Luca continued. He turned from the window to face her. "Victoria Ashford. She works with your stepfather. She manufactures evidence. She feeds information to authorities. She creates the kind of destruction that looks legal from the outside. Clara's vision blurred. Victoria. She had seen that name on documents. She had heard it whispered by lawyers who suddenly would not return her calls. Victoria Ashford, wealthy enough to erase people simply by deciding they should not exist. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked. Because, Luca said, I am going to dismantle both of them. He did not say it with anger. He said it the way a man might describe the weather. Simple. Inevitable. Already decided. 3 blocks away, in a glass office building that caught the midnight light, James Whitfield sat across from Victoria Ashford. He was smaller than he appeared in family photographs, hunched forward, his face the color of old paper. Victoria was composed, elegant, her silver hair swept back from a face that had learned not to show emotion. The paperwork is filed, Victoria said. She held a folder in her hands, and she opened it with deliberate slowness. Lily enters foster care on Monday. Clara's name will be on every negative report we can generate. By the time she tries to appeal, her reputation will be destroyed. James Whitfield's hand shook as he signed the documents. And the money will be transferred tonight, Victoria said. Your offshore account. $300,000, and you disappear. Leave the country. Do not look back. Do not contact Clara again. That is the arrangement. He nodded, but something in his eyes suggested that he did not quite believe it would be so simple. Meanwhile, at the Castelliano penthouse, Luca made a single phone call. His voice did not rise. He did not need to shout. He simply spoke, and people listened, because that was how power actually worked. Marco, he said. Gather 12 men. Full tactical. I want surveillance on James Whitfield's location. I want every bank record Victoria Ashford has touched in the last 5 years. I want it done before dawn. The call disconnected. Clara had fallen asleep on the sofa in Luca's study, exhaustion finally overwhelming the adrenaline. Her face was turned toward the cushion, and even in sleep, she looked haunted. Luca stood over her for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers curled into fists even in unconsciousness. He thought of his daughter. He thought of the nursery on the 3rd floor that he had never touched, never entered, never allowed anyone to disturb. Lily's room. He had named her Lily before she was born. She had died in the hospital at 4 hours old, and he had not held her. He had not said goodbye. He had walked out of that hospital and never spoke her name again, because the sound of it would have unmade him completely. But this woman who had stood between a stranger and violence with nothing but her own body as a shield. This woman who counted $43 and still somehow believed that survival was possible. Something about her reached into the frozen places inside him and demanded that he remember how to feel. He covered her with a blanket and left the room. At 5:44 in the morning, 12 men dressed in black tactical gear moved through the darkness like ghosts. They did not announce themselves. They did not knock. They came through windows and doors simultaneously, a coordinated surge of purpose. James Whitfield was still awake, packing a suitcase, when they arrived. His face went white. He opened his mouth to speak, but Marco was already placing him in handcuffs, reading him his rights in a voice devoid of any emotion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The tears came then. James Whitfield collapsed onto the floor, his body convulsing with sobs. He was not a dangerous man. He was simply a greedy one. He had stolen from someone weaker, and now the machinery of consequence was moving toward him with inexorable precision. At a luxury hotel across the city, FBI agents knocked on Victoria Ashford's door. She opened it wearing a silk robe, and for the first time in her life, her composure fractured. The agents held federal warrants. They carried boxes. They took everything. By 7:15 in the morning, Her name was on every news channel in Miami. The story spread like wildfire through the digital world. Within 2 hours, 5 million people had seen footage of her arrest. By noon, her face was synonymous with corruption. Her network collapsed. Her business partners abandoned her. Her lawyers withdrew. The society that had embraced her for decades turned away as if she had never existed at all. Federal prison. 40 years. The sentence fell like a hammer. Clara woke in the penthouse as dawn broke across the city. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then she saw Luca standing by the window, and it all came flooding back. "Your stepfather was arrested at 5:24 this morning," Luca said without preamble. "Victoria Ashford was arrested at 6:13. Both are in federal custody. Both face multiple felony charges. The evidence against them is extensive and irrefutable." Clara stood up slowly. The world tilted. She reached for the back of the sofa to steady herself. "Your niece is safe," Luca continued. "She will remain with her current guardian until a legal hearing. You will get custody. This is already arranged." "I do not understand," Clara whispered. "Why would you do this? You do not even know me." Luca turned to face her. His eyes held something she had not seen before, something raw and close to breaking. "Because someone should have done it for me once. Because I have spent 12 years building an empire and feeling nothing. Because you stood between a stranger and violence when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and that is the kind of person that the world needs. That is the kind of person I need." The rain began to fall again outside the window, but it was a gentle rain now, not the storm of the previous night. It fell like a benediction on the city below. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. 1 year later, the autumn sun descended across Miami like honey poured from a pitcher, and Clara Vasquez stood in the glass and steel lobby of the Castellano Foundation for At-Risk Youth, wearing a navy blazer that fit perfectly, not stolen, not borrowed, but purchased with her own paychecks from her new position as director. Her name was embossed on the door. Clara Vasquez, Executive Director. She traced the letters with her fingertip every time she passed through, still half convinced it was someone else's office. The orthopedic shoes had given way to flats. The stained apron had dissolved into memory. Her back, once a topography of scars hidden beneath long sleeves, now bore marks of healing, thin white lines that caught the light sometimes but no longer burned with pain. Lily sat in the corner of the office on a cushioned chair reading a picture book, her small feet swinging. She was 8 years old now, legal custody transferred to Clara after the trials concluded, after the judges had reviewed the case files and found no reason to separate them. The child's drawing, the original one, the family rendered in colored pencil, now laminated and mounted in a frame on Clara's desk, had become something sacred. A relic. A promise kept. "Miss Clara, you have a visitor," one of the staff members said quietly, knocking once. Luca stood in the hallway, and in the afternoon light filtering through the windows, she could see him more clearly than she ever had before. He was dressed simply today, dark slacks, a cream-colored shirt unbuttoned at the collar, no gold watch, no rings. Just a man. 43 years old with silver threading through his dark hair, eyes that held 12 years of empire building and the last year of something she did not have a name for yet. "Hello," he said, his voice measured and calm. "I brought someone I wanted you to meet." Behind him stepped a woman in her 70s, white-haired and sharp-eyed, holding a stack of folders. Luca's hand moved to her back, a gesture of such gentleness that Clara felt something shift in her chest. This was his mother. He had told Clara that once, in the penthouse at 3 in the morning, but Clara had not understood the weight of it then. "This is Rosa," Luca said. "She managed my legitimate businesses for 20 years before I took over. She wants to help with the foundation. She has been researching scholarship programs for foster children." He paused. "I asked her to come today because I wanted you to meet her. Because I wanted you to know that my life is changing. That I am changing." Clara felt Lily move to stand beside her, the child's small hand finding hers. Rosa smiled with such warmth that Clara had to look away. That evening, after Rosa had left with 3 notebooks full of scholarship ideas and Lily had been put to bed in the small apartment that Clara rented now, not a penthouse, something modest, something hers, Luca asked if they could sit on the balcony. The city sprawled below them in 1,000 pinpricks of light, and the November air was cool without being cold. "I learned something this year," Luca said, his fingers threading through hers. "Something I did not know I needed to learn." He turned to face her. 6 months ago, I read Lily a bedtime story. The book was about a girl who was afraid of the dark, and I sat beside her until she fell asleep, and for the first time in my life, I understood something about myself. I understood that the darkness I had been carrying, the loss of my daughter, it had made me believe that love was something that only brought pain. That opening yourself to another person was a form of suicide. He paused. "But then you walked into my life, stepping in front of violence without hesitation, and you showed me that courage looks like something else entirely. Courage looks like love." Clara's hands were trembling. "I was nobody," she whispered. "I was invisible." "You were never invisible to me," Luca said. "The moment I saw you, you were the only thing that was visible. And I knew then that I had spent 12 years building an empire so that when you finally arrived, I would have something to offer you besides my broken heart." The city lights blurred through her tears. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in December, Clara stood in a small chapel in Miami's historic district, her dress simple white silk, her dark hair braided with sprigs of white jasmine. Her foster mother from the state system had been invited, the woman who had checked on her for years and never abandoned her. Marco and Franco stood to the side, and in their eyes was something Clara had learned to recognize, the shock of watching their boss become fully human before them. Luca waited at the altar in a dark suit, his hand steady, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the air between them shimmer. When she reached him, he took both her hands and held them as if they were precious, which they were. "I have loved you since that night in the rain," he said, his voice carrying across the small chapel. "I have loved you every day since. I will love you for the rest of my life." Lily, as flower girl, scattered white petals with the concentration of a general commanding troops, her small face serious and focused. She wore a dress of pale blue, and when Clara glanced at her during the vows, the child mouthed something, "Mommy," a word that had taken months to coax out, that had arrived finally one morning when Lily woke from a nightmare and reached for Clara, and Clara held her, and the child whispered, "My mommy won't let me fall." And Clara understood that love was not always grand. Sometimes it was as simple as showing up, again and again, for someone else's terror. The reception was held at a restaurant overlooking the bay. Luca's legitimate business partners attended, no black suits, no menace, just people in fine clothes celebrating a marriage. The federal prison sentences for James Whitfield and Victoria Ashford were already 3 months old now. Her stepfather's appeals had been dismissed. Victoria was living in a 6x8 cell, her empire dismantled, her reputation erased from the society that had once embraced her. The news cycles had moved on to other scandals, and both villains had faded into the background noise of the city's injustice system, forgotten by everyone except those they had harmed. Near midnight, Luca led Clara onto the balcony. The city was quiet, the bay black and still. "I want to tell you something," he said. "I dissolved the parts of my organization that could not be legitimized. The money is being moved into legal channels. The foundation has received $10 million as seed funding. I am going to spend the rest of my life building something that helps people like you, people who were invisible, people who were told they were nobody." Clara leaned against him. "What about your empire? Your men? Some of them will retire. Some will work for the foundation. Some will disappear the way people like us disappear." He pulled back to look at her. "But none of that matters anymore. The only empire I care about now is the one I am building with you." 2 months later, Clara sat in a doctor's office with a small white card in her trembling hands. The word positive glowed on the screen. She was 3 weeks pregnant. The doctor was speaking about vitamins and checkups, but Clara was thinking about a drawing on a wall, a family rendered in colored pencil, and how sometimes the world does correct itself, sometimes the invisible becomes seen, sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. This story teaches us that redemption exists not in grand gestures but in the daily choice to stand beside another person. It teaches us that the most powerful people among us are often those who refuse to let darkness win. Clara Vasquez was told she was nobody. James Whitfield stole her inheritance and her childhood. Victoria Ashford manufactured evidence and orchestrated her destruction. But Clara stood anyway. Clara fought anyway. Clara loved anyway. And because she did, an entire network of corruption fell. How did Clara's story make you feel? What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Have you ever known someone who survived something that was supposed to break them? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation that helps us continue creating stories about people who deserve to be remembered. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with someone you love. We wish you all good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.